At Boeing, they have a slightly different approach because they have a challenge of not being able to control the entire life cycle, obviously, of using an airplane. They don't score as well on the Carbon Disclosure Project this year. They did move from 35 out of 100 points to 53, so they're showing significant progress, and I think that's why they scored well on the performance report. And they really are taking a look at climate from 3 pathways to reduce carbon impacts. 1 is increasing the fuel efficiency of the airplanes that they build. 2 is reducing the life cycle CO2 associated with operating the airplanes as well. And 3 is in working on how the airplanes are used through tailored arrivals. The key really to their success, as I mentioned in the gain times good equation, is the partnerships with suppliers and their customers. For example, the tailored arrival effort changed landing patterns that increased fuel efficiency. They had to work with key partner airlines, which are their customers, and engine makers to make this program work. And in a test of 1,000 flights, we're able to save 1.1 million tons of CO2. They also have a very targeted philanthropy approach, which really is well aligned with their core business. For example, the Flight of Hope delivered emergency aid using a delivery of a new airplane to an airline in China, and in order to further offset carbon in the environment, matched their employee giving to offset carbon in reforestation in Southern California after a devastating fire there in 2007. So they really have a very aligned strategy and I think have a great approach. So before we turn it over to Chris, just a quick checkpoint on having a plan. I think one of these things that both of the companies that we just talked about do well and other companies who have successful carbon strategies do well is planning. So I think there are a few things that you might want to consider when thinking about carbon impacts in your organization. First, do you know the risks and the opportunities? I think a lot of focus tends to be on the risk in a defensive posture, and opportunities, as you can see in the examples we just looked at, can be quite significant on a financial perspective. Who could be potential strategic partners to work with in making these opportunities happen? And then when you get ready to plan, what is your plan for reducing climate change impacts in your operations, in your supply chain, in your product, including the product use? Make a plan to foster and exploit innovation. Then, as Nike likes to say, just do it. Leverage those opportunities and exploit them, foster innovation, and then execute. That's all I have for today. I'm going to hand it back quickly to Paul to give a quick introduction to Chris. Paul?
Yes, so Chris Erickson is the CEO of Climate Earth. It's a leading carbon accounting firm. Chris is an experienced CEO, having led technology industry at both a large Fortune 500 company as well as software startups, and helped and led them to going public. Chris and his leadership with Climate Earth and team over at Climate Earth has really focused on a breakthrough intellectual property where it's a holistic view at looking at carbon and mapping it to the financial statements so that you can see both the human impact and the profit, or as Tara likes to say, the gain and the good at the same time. So Chris is going to share in-depth case studies, and hopefully that will inspire you to do the same and accelerate progress at your organization, or look for ways to collaborate with everyone on the call. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and here we go.
Okay. Thank you, Paul. It's great to be here, and I'm going to just move right into the presentation because I think we've got a lot of material to cover, and hopefully you'll find the specifics that I'm going to be discussing to be of value and interest.
And if anybody has questions along the way, please feel free to use the online chat window on the right-hand side of the screen.
So we've seen an amazing transformation in the last 12 months. A year ago, carbon was viewed as a metric for doing good, and I think today it's emerging and, in fact, already is for many companies, moved from being a do-good metric to a strategic metric for managing a business. A lot of this has to do with Walmart's push, but I think some of the early adopters have found that there's enormous advantage in managing the carbon, especially in the supply chain, around cost avoidance, revenue generation, designing new products and innovating, and of course customer satisfaction and reputation and culture. I hope we'll try and tie everything back today to these benefits of carbon accounting as I dive into specifics, case studies, in clients and customers that we've worked with. In terms of the agenda today, I am going to excuse me for some of those of you who have been involved in this deeply. A couple slides on the basics of carbon accounting to set the foundation. a discussion of carbon metrics and how they can be applied generally, and then a deep dive into a couple of cases, and then a wrap-up. Paul introduced this, I think, very nicely. Climate Earth was founded a couple years ago with the notion that supply chain carbon accounting was going to emerge as a strategic metric. We combine deep expertise in life cycle analysis with large-scale data analysis capabilities that generates an approach that's a little different than other suppliers. We're kind of a cross between a quality consulting organization that you can hire to do this accounting for you. Typically, though, they do it once, and repeatability becomes more problematic, and other suppliers who offer software solutions where they facilitate you doing the work, but they leave the work to you. So we developed a company with the idea that we can be the best of both worlds. That is, deliver results and answers to you that are backed by great science. We focus on 3 levels of product: enterprise, product modeling, and supply chain metrics. And today, of course, we'll be talking about the supply chain metrics approach. Greenhouse gases fall into 6 primary gases that we measure. All of them impact global warming, of course, and those gases then are converted to CO2 equivalents, so we have a common, consistent measure of your greenhouse gas emissions across your enterprise and your supply chain. What we've found for many companies, and what, of course, is true, is that supply chain emissions are strategic. And they're strategic for a specific set of customers. Those are companies that make something you can touch and feel: discrete manufacturing, construction, packaged foods, packaged goods in general, computers and telecom. In these kinds of businesses, the supply chain carbon emissions are typically 70 to 90% of total emissions. And they're where the opportunities for innovation, revenue generation, and cost reductions lie. These emissions can be harder to get at because they require fairly in-depth analysis and then potentially working directly with suppliers. So I'll be talking today about how that's happening today. Carbon sources, as we mentioned, most of them are in the supply chain. There's actually 2 different levels of supply chain. Upstream, which is where your materials and products and processes lie in creating products. Your direct emissions in the middle here, that is your electricity and direct use. And then supply chain's emissions that are downstream. The cases that I'm addressing today are going to be focused on upstream and incorporate internal scope 1 and 2, or your direct emissions and electricity. We're not talking about cases today using downstream emissions or looking at downstream, though that can be a critical factor as well as products are designed and developed, and something that Climate Earth also practices.